You can't. Obviously you can, but with scripts stuffed with 17,000 lines of code, would you want to? Why have you done this? There are a lot of videos about the current state of Yandere Simulator, about the performance, about the code, about the gameplay in general, but while that is, nobody's really made a video on how to fix the game. Probably because nobody wants to look stupid for suggesting something wrong, as if you could at this point. But don't worry, that's all about to change. Today we're going to take a look at Yandere Simulator's programming and suggest changes that could potentially go towards fixing the game. This took me forever to find because the code disappeared faster than something that disappears quickly. We're only going to look at the major areas because otherwise we'll be here forever. This isn't a Kappa Kaiju video. Shit. Now, it's important to remember that the aim of this video isn't to shit on bad programming, it's to learn from it. YandereDev will probably ignore this, but that doesn't mean we should. If you know a better way to do a thing, then scream it at everyone in the comments, and the person to scream the loudest will win an opportunity to subscribe. Go on, I know you want to. We've all heard about this notorious beast, but what exactly does it do, Dad? Well, my boy, it does f***ing everything. This script has been hitting the steroids to the point where it's reached 17,000 lines of code. One script. What? So what does it actually do? Well, updates a second and third speed, reaction, extraction, animation, sound effects, updating Pathfinding, updates detection marks, when detection alarm, reputation change, every single frame. Most of this stuff can just be moved into their own scripts. Yeah, it's going to take some time, but it doesn't need to be here, it just needs to move. Separating this script into individual scripts that are strictly responsible for a single purpose, within reason, will immediately make this easier to read. Yeah, the number of scripts we have increases, but that's literally software development. You're gonna have a lot of scripts. After you've spent 206 years moving, refactoring, and accounting for new script references, a lot of this stuff can be abstracted. Jack, what the hell do you mean? All the logic is conceptually separated by the fact it does something different based on what behaviour a student is currently performing. What we can do is use a combination of inheritance, interfaces, and/or abstract classes to create a single parent class function that performs different logic depending on what child class is being used. Now we're getting to the saucy bit. Wait till you see what it looks like. Wow. In context to Yandere Simulator, we can use this to create multiple behaviours with their own logic that can be swapped out when they need to be and perform their own logic when they need to. But Jack, what about all those student checks in the StudentScript script? You forgot about them!
Delete them.
Alright, so you need some sort of check that determines when you change a behaviour and what behaviour you change it to, but other than that, all the logic for the behaviours themselves can go into their own behaviour class. We don't need that in the normal update function anymore. This is essentially a super tidy way of doing the exact same thing, but only this time we don't have to walk to the ends of the earth, because as we all know, the earth's flat. It's important to note that it can be easy to over-engineer something or try to preempt when you might need something when you probably don't actually need it at all. Even I do that sometimes, so just try not to overcomplicate it for yourself. A good rule of thumb is that if you find yourself writing something multiple times in different places, especially in related classes, then it's probably a good sign you need to do some magician. Personality-wise, determining what kinds of personalities the students have and what behaviours they have could be done using scriptable objects. These beautiful little bits of magic can be shared across the students that share the same personality type. This is the benefit of a scriptable object. They are a one-to-many sort of system. It's essentially the flyweight pattern, which is actually my favourite pattern. The only trick is knowing about them and knowing how to use them, so go do it. Bloody hell, that was a long one, wasn't it? We've cleaned it up, and we've still got more to talk about. Ever wrote code that does something really important? I'm talking like the thing that essentially progresses your entire gameplay loop, of which I've heard is quite important. Chances are your code only needs to execute at certain points or when a specific condition is met. Chances are we might not always know when that will happen. What do? Yandere Simulator says, "Fuck it, I'll check every frame." What's happening is that every single student individually checks what time it is so they can change or update the goal or activity they're currently doing. Now, that might be fine and it might be a viable way to go about it, especially if you've got a small number of students, but if you've got hundreds, chances are your computer's going to shit itself. But what if instead of doing a check every single frame, we just don't? An event allows us to sign up multiple objects to listen out for the sweet screams of a single voice in a busy network of hundreds in a one-to-many relationship. For this to work, we're going to have to move all the conditional logic somewhere else. I don't care where. Then we subscribe this method to be called when a specific event is evoked. It makes sense that a single school clock class would take care of the time logic. So it also makes sense that this class would invoke an on-time change event when you want it to. When it gets invoked, all instances of the StudentScript script will slap that method. But how does the student know what time it is? We still have conditional logic to sort out. Well, we can slap the time along with that event call, and then all the StudentScript scripts have got the time. Are you slapping, son? Events allow us to decouple large amounts of code and give us a lovely clean way of telling all those future failures at Yandere High they failed their home economics class because Stacy set fire to Mrs. Fungal's hair while trying to make some cheesy mashed potato. This is great. As I'm sure you've all been made aware over the course of this game being in development, that Yandere Simulator has a couple of if statements lying around. Not too many, but just enough to piss off the cat. We've already taken care of the if statements by kicking them off for another class to worry about. But with the sheer amount of conditional statements and in the way that it's done, it's not only a performance problem, it's also a problem with the fact it makes your eyes bleed. Nobody really mentions it, but if statements can have a large performance impact when they're done like this. Granted, it can be a small performance impact, but when done the way Yandere Simulator's done it, we need to talk about it. I should point out that he does return out of some if statements so further checks don't run, but it's also not consistent when he does that, and we'll talk about that later on. Regardless of whether he returns an if statement or not, imagine the worst case scenario. What would that be? The worst case would be that the condition that we actually want is at the bottom of all those condition checks. Therefore, we've got to go through each condition to check if it's correct or not before we find the one that is actually the one we want. And if it's at the bottom of hundreds, it's going to take a while. Enter my mate, Mr. Switch. I really did debate doing that joke, and it was just as shit as I thought, but I'm going to keep it in anyway, so shut up. If this is an if statement, this is a switch. There's not much of a difference other than syntax. Not only is a switch statement easier to follow when you have tens of conditions to check, but a switch statement can have a performance gain over large sets of condition checks than if statements. But that's not even the point. Like, a switch statement has some logical flow and readability to it, and Yandere Simulator, it bloody needs one. Now, I am aware that with a switch statement you can't easily evaluate multiple conditions, and that is a problem with switch statements, but at this rate, we need to just ignore that and just put a switch statement in there. Please. It's important to keep your code clean and readable. Even if nobody else is going to be looking at it, you will be. You don't want to be overwhelmed looking at it weeks later and saying screw it and then writing a single class with 20,000 lines just for a main menu. You know when you and your friends are ordering takeout and you all share the same price so it's cheaper? Ah, what a great time. But that now one punk orders the most expensive item on the menu and you all just stare at him. He just stares back with that stupid smile on his face and he mutters the words, "I'm a hungry boy." Yeah, well that's sort of what get components like. It's not just get component, there's other methods too, like find object, that actually do a whole bunch of stuff that you're not actually aware of. Yandere Simulator actually uses getComponent multiple times to get the same component, and it's actually quite common to see people do this when they aren't aware of how expensive it is. Using it once or twice is completely fine if it's in controlled logic, but again, doing it every frame will affect your game's performance, especially in gameplay critical loops. Your game's not going to explode just because you use component multiple times in one frame, but using it every frame will actually bite you in the ass because of what the getComponent actually does under the hood. Best practice is to cache the result once early on, if you plan on using these references often, and this is usually done in the start method. It stops the need to constantly use the call and provides you with a quick access to that reference again. So just remember, if you want your game to have buttery, smooth frames, make sure any gameplay sensitive loops are clear of expensive method calls and cache them early on if you can. You'll thank yourself later, and then maybe you'll thank me. And then maybe you'll thank Yandere Simulator, but nobody's going to do that, so just thank me. You're welcome. Pathfinding. Use unities. I know I said we were going to focus on the code of Yandere Simulator, but to ignore graphical performance is sort of like ignoring it when your door falls off your car. You don't need it to drive, but it fucking helps. There's many videos about unoptimized geometry in this game, to the point I'm probably just echoing a lot of what's already been said, but that should show how important it is. It would help if we had the actual Unity project so we could profile everything, but we don't, so we're just going to have to use a bit of imagination. For how this game looks, it shouldn't be running the way it does, below 50 FPS. Even if you were to fully optimize the code, if the geometry of your models are balked, the game's going to have a seizure. It doesn't matter if you're the Gandalf of code. If your toothbrush is made of 65 million triangles, the only thing you'll be brushing are your eyes. Just by looking at the students, the entire game starts tweaking and screaming, almost as though it's trying to tell us something. If by looking at the students the game starts freaking out, then maybe that's a sign. What if I was to say that when you're not looking at the characters, they're still being rendered? For example, a group of nerdy students stealing Pokemon cards behind a wall could still be rendered even though you can't see them. There's a really cool trick that can help solve this issue. That is, if this is even an issue in the first place. It might not be, but this is something really cool and something that you can all use for your own games. Occlusion culling is a technique where the game engine stops rendering meshes that can't be seen by the camera even when it's technically still in front of it. It helps reduce what the GPU actually needs to draw. There's no point rendering what you can't see, well, because you can't see it. Allowing Unity or any engine to cull unseen students will probably help graphical performance while in the school because their meshes are no longer being rendered when you're behind a wall.
That sounds super complicated though. I wouldn't even know where to start with that.
God, we're spoiled. Again, it's entirely possible that graphics in this game, geometry and everything has been optimized and is no longer a problem whatsoever. And if that is the case, what in the prickly monkey is wrong with this game? I do believe it's not one or the other in terms of whether it's code or graphical. I do think it's a combination of both, and it is a combination in both in general game development, but here specifically I think it might be a combination of both still. Making an optimized game is hard, but there are things you can do early on in development that can help you stray away from poor performance. Geometry optimization, texture size and compression, occlusion culling, and other stuff I literally can't think of right now, so ask me later and I'll Google it. But what's more important than all of that is something called consistency. Don't get me wrong, I like to mix things up as much as the next guy, but in programming, that's just a game of Russian roulette, because in the end, that's where everyone's gonna end up. Prototyping a game through prototyped code entirely before you start then fixing it isn't a good excuse, and that is a really bad practice because you're never going to get around to actually changing that code. If you do a thing using switch statements, don't then do something similar later on using if statements unless absolutely necessary. If you use an event to tell a bunch of blubber sponges where the player is, Don't then use an elaborate network of unnecessarily linked classes and method calls to notify the UI when the player lost some sanity. This is why so many companies have coding standards that they want you to learn before you start actually writing code, so that whatever code you write isn't completely dissimilar or in a different way to something another programmer on the same team would write. We don't do it so it looks nice on the bookshelf. We do it so nobody ends up arguing with the drinks machine late at night because they've lost their sanity. Regardless of experience, consistency is key, something this channel likes to pride itself on. But most importantly, no matter what, always know when you need help and know when to accept it. You can't know everything and you can't do everything. Sometimes criticism will hurt, but in the end, it's not personal. Sometimes it will feel personal, especially on the internet, but try and take what they're actually saying from that. Try and see what they're actually saying, and if they're not saying anything at all, fuck them. Knowing when you need help is one thing, but actually asking for help and accepting help when you're offered it is another. Nobody likes admitting they can't do something or they don't know something, but it's human and it's important for your development of whatever you're trying to do. Never mind coding, whether it's dancing, acting, drawing, animating, content creating, accepting help can only make you better. It can't make you weaker. It can only make you stronger. YandereDev has had help in the past, but it's never really ended positively. From the way I see it, it comes from a sense of underlying egotism surrounding the fact that Yandere Simulator is his game and not theirs. It shows from his track record of not being the most appreciative guy in when he receives help, especially when it comes to crediting people who have helped him make his game. It might even stem from the fact he doesn't want help in the first place, and if that's the case, well, that's fair enough. But YandereDev, there's a way to go about it. If YandereDev was to be more accepting of help and got help more often and for longer, there's a great possibility that this game would be much further on than it is now, and possibly out sooner than it is destined to be. So what am I getting at? Know when you need help. Be respectful of the help that you receive, regardless of whether you want it or not. Don't show yourself up, and learn to listen to the people around you, especially those who are trying to help or those giving valuable criticism. It's okay to not want help, but it's also okay to be helped too. If there's one channel that often openly talks about the help they've had in their career, like from the start, it's the Game Grumps. They're always being humble about how they've got to where they are now because of the help they've had. And it's just inspiring. It's actually something we should actually be hearing more often about receiving help and that nobody's alone. And if you want to get somewhere, you have to be willing to accept help when you need it. They recently uploaded a video called Grump Wave, which is a combination of music and animation to some of the things they've talked about in their gameplay videos throughout the years about success and creativity, and I really do recommend it for anyone who wants to be inspired and motivated. That's it, we're done. I'm surprised you're still here actually, because I got bored about 10 minutes ago and I got alternate Jack to finish the video for me. Isn't that right, Jack? That's our Jack. There's other stuff we could have covered, like solid principles or the 4 pillars of object-oriented programming, but to be honest, they need their own videos to explain properly, and there's loads of them already, so if you want to know about them, go watch one of them. Programming, like everything else, is a constant learning process. You're not born a natural expert of programming. We're always learning. And we're always learning to use Stack Overflow and how to eventually move there, because that's where everybody ends up. Programming can and will affect your game, so do your best and learn what you can over time. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed what this little thing we shared here today. I know I did. I'm off to go down my 75th cup of coffee and then edit this whole thing. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, and if you want to see more, consider subscribing. Oh, and if you have any ideas of what I could do later on, let me know in the comments and I'll consider it. Oh yeah, and if you didn't like the video, just comment about it on my Animal Crossing video, because that's what everybody else seems to be.
You hate Animal Crossing, you disgusting little fuck monkey. I did not spend 8,000 hours building a metropolis of love and peace for you to call it shit. If you do not delete that video, soon I will cook you like the pig you are. Do you understand?
Yes, I understand. Although, if you think about it, 8,000 hours is a little extreme, don't you think?